How? J.P. Morgan became wealthy and famous. What do you get when you mix a sickly child, a volcanic island, a nose that terrified photographers, and a banker who once locked America's financial elite in a library until they fixed the economy? You get John Pierpont Morgan, the man who didn't just shape Wall Street, he was Wall Street. But how did a boy born into velvet and stock certificates in Hartford, Connecticut, become the unofficial president of the United States? Why did he glare at CEOs until they confessed their financial sins? What made him fund libraries while monopolizing industries? And what on earth was the deal with that nose? This is not just a biography. It's a saga of ambition, tragedy, and eyebrow-raising tactics. It was April 17, 1837, in Hartford, Connecticut, a town known for insurance, but on that day, it ensured the birth of a financial juggernaut. John Pierpont Morgan entered the world not with a cry, but probably with a ledger in hand. His family was so steeped in wealth, rumor has it they swaddled him in stock certificates, because silk was too pedestrian, and nothing says welcome to capitalism like a blanket that appreciates in value. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was a financier with the kind of reputation that made other bankers check their balance sheets twice before shaking his hand. Junius wasn't just rich, he was respected, methodical, and had the uncanny ability to smell a bad investment from 3 continents away. His mother, Juliet Pierpont, brought poetry to the portfolio. Her father, John Pierpont, was a poet, preacher, and abolitionist, a man who believed in the power of words and righteousness. He once said, "Wealth is not of money, but of mind." Clearly his grandson would disagree. And then there was Uncle James Lord Pierpont, the man who wrote Jingle Bells. Yes, that Jingle Bells. So while other families gave fruitcakes for Christmas, the Morgans gave royalties. Even Santa probably owed them interest. Young Pierpont, never John, mind you, because that sounded like someone who worked retail, was a delicate child. At 15, rheumatic fever hit him like a Wall Street crash. He was bedridden, in agony, and unable to walk. His father, ever the strategist, shipped him off to the Azores for recovery. It sounds cruel until you realize the Azores are a Portuguese paradise of volcanic islands and ocean breezes. It was like sending someone to rehab in Maui. There, Pierpont didn't just heal, he evolved. He learned French, stared down the Atlantic until it blinked, and probably practiced the glare that would later make CEOs weep into their balance sheets. He returned to Boston, stronger, sharper, and with the kind of quiet menace that made even the sun second-guess its brightness. Pierpont attended Boston's English High School, a place that specialized in mathematics and commerce. It was less about poetry and more about profit margins. Then came the University of Göttingen in Germany, where he became fluent in German and fluent in intimidating people with his intellect. He didn't just speak German, he weaponized it. Professors reportedly paused mid-lecture when Morgan raised his hand, unsure if they were about to be corrected or acquired. In 1857, Morgan joined Duncan, Sherman & Co., the American arm of George Peabody & Co. He was young, ambitious, and already allergic to mediocrity. One of his first moves? He bought a cargo of coffee using company funds, without permission. It was a gamble that could have ended his career. Instead, he sold it for a massive profit and earned the nickname the Coffee Kid. Okay, not really, but he did earn respect. By 1861, he was working directly for his father's firm in New York. The prodigal son had returned, not with apologies, but with a plan. In 1871, Morgan partnered with Anthony Drexel to form Drexel, Morgan & Co. Why Drexel? Because Drexel had connections, capital, and credibility. Morgan had vision, venom, and a vault full of ambition. Together, they built a financial Olympus. By 1895, it became J.P. Morgan & Co., a name that made governments nervous and competitors nauseous. This wasn't a bank, it was a cathedral of capitalism. And Morgan? He was Zeus with a cigar, hurling lightning bolts of credit and consolidation. In 1861, Morgan married Amelia Sturgis, a woman of grace and charm. But fate, ever cruel, took her just 4 months later, tuberculosis. Morgan was devastated. He buried his grief in work, cigars, and eventually another marriage. In 1865, he wed Frances Louisa Tracy. Together they had 4 children, including J.P. Morgan Jr., who inherited the empire but not the gravitas. Morgan Sr. was a man of contradictions, a devout Episcopalian who collected Renaissance art, a ruthless capitalist who funded libraries, and a man so self-conscious about his bulbous nose that he refused to be photographed unless he could control the lighting like a Hollywood diva. He once said, "If I must be photographed, let it be in shadow. My nose is not for public consumption." Morgan didn't just fund companies, he Frankensteined them into existence. In 1892, he merged Edison General Electric with Thomson Houston to create General Electric. It was like combining Tesla and Apple, but with more cigars and fewer tweets. Then came 1901, the mother of all mergers. Morgan combined Carnegie Steel with several smaller firms to create U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. Andrew Carnegie walked away with $480 million and a smug grin that could be seen from space. Morgan, meanwhile, had forged an industrial Excalibur. Morgan's tactics: ruthless efficiency. He'd invite CEOs to his library, a room so intimidating it made Versailles look like IKEA. He'd glare at them until they confessed their financial sins, then reorganize their companies like a chess master rearranging pawns. He was the original corporate therapist, except his sessions ended with you losing your job and Morgan gaining your company. One executive reportedly said, "I walked in with a company and walked out with a severance package and a handshake. Morgan didn't speak much, but his silence was louder than my quarterly losses." Picture this. Wall Street in October 1907 looked like a financial apocalypse. The stock market was in free fall, trust companies were imploding, and the U.S. Treasury was emptier than a campaign promise. The Knickerbocker Trust Company had collapsed after a failed stock cornering scheme involving United Copper, triggering a domino effect of panic. And where was President Theodore Roosevelt? Off in the wild, hunting bears. Yes, literal bears. While the economy was bleeding out, Teddy was somewhere in Louisiana, probably wrestling a grizzly and writing poetry about it. Enter J.P. Morgan. He didn't wait for permission. He summoned the nation's top bankers to his private library, a room so intimidating it made Versailles look like a broom closet. The doors were locked. No one left until Morgan said so. It was less a meeting and more a financial hostage situation. Morgan paced, glared, and dictated terms like a general in a war room. The climax? Moore & Schley, a brokerage firm drowning in $25 million of debt, was about to collapse. Their collateral? Stock in Tennessee coal and iron. Morgan orchestrated a deal. U.S. Steel would buy the stock, stabilize the firm, and prevent a cascade of bankruptcies. Roosevelt, fresh off his bear hunt, agreed not to interfere. By dawn, the bankers emerged, pale, shaken, and obedient. The crisis was averted. Morgan had saved capitalism with a glare and a ledger. The New York Times hailed him as the old man who looked out for America's financial system. Roosevelt, ever the wit, quipped, "Morgan is a man who always wants to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral." But power breeds paranoia. By 1912, whispers of a money trust had grown into roars. Congress launched the Pujo Committee, led by Arsène Pujo and interrogated by the relentless Samuel Untermyer. Their mission? To prove that Morgan and his banking buddies controlled the entire U.S. economy. Morgan was hauled before Congress. He sat like a sphinx, unbothered, unblinking. When asked if his bank controlled the economy, he leaned in and delivered a line so suave it should have been engraved on his tombstone. "Money is like a woman. If you have to ask, you'll never understand." The committee discovered that Morgan's firm and its allies controlled 341 directorships across 112 corporations, with over $22 billion in resources, in 1913 dollars. That's not a monopoly, it's an empire. Now let's talk about the nose. Morgan's nose was legendary, bulbous, purplish, and shaped like a rogue potato. Cartoonists adored it. They exaggerated it to grotesque proportions, turning Morgan into a caricature of capitalism itself. One magazine published a particularly unflattering sketch. Morgan, incensed, bought up every single copy. Not some. Every single copy. "Vanity, thy name is Pierpont." He didn't mind being called a robber baron, but heaven forbid anyone mock the royal schnoz. Behind the glare and the nose was a man of culture. Morgan was a voracious art collector. His acquisitions formed the backbone of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He didn't just buy paintings, he bought civilizations. Egyptian artifacts, Renaissance masterpieces, medieval manuscripts, his collection was a museum before it had walls. He also funded churches, hospitals, and libraries. Why? Because Morgan believed wealth should serve civilization, after it served him, of course. He once said, "No problem in human affairs is ever solved by money alone, but it helps." Morgan died in Rome on March 31, 1913. The New York Stock Exchange closed for 2 hours in his honor, a gesture usually reserved for presidents and popes. His estate was worth $80 million, but his influence, priceless. He didn't just shape the economy, he was in the economy. And when he died, the world didn't just lose a banker, it lost its financial North Star. Before we dive deeper into the drama, the deals, and the dazzling nose of JP Morgan, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and smash that notification bell, so you never miss a moment of intrigue, scandal, and historical brilliance. We've got stories that will make you gasp, laugh, and maybe even question your savings account. So if you love tales of titans, twists of fate, and the kind of storytelling that turns history into high drama, this is your channel. Next up,